Chapter 1. The leafy crown of the tree made a rustling sound, and the night wind blew up, picking up the green leaves that accidentally broke off the branches and throwing them into the gloomy sky. These past few days have been cloudy and dim, and even at noon there's not been a single ray of bright sunshine leaking down to the earth. Countless towers, which bear both defense and assault functions, form a round arc and spread out in all directions at just the right distance. They overlap and tightly protect the human city in the middle. Compared to the noisy and prosperous human towns in the mainland, this dangerous zone at the forefront of the battlefield seems much more deserted. Countless war towers rising like towering mountains give people a majestic and solemn feeling at a glance. Snap, snap, snap. The dark boots made a heavy sound when they stepped on the hard stone. The sound of footsteps is very rhythmic and gives people an unusually sonorous and powerful feeling. Two soldiers with solemn faces, holding muskets in hand and guarding the stone gate in front of the stone gate, showed subtle expressions when they saw the coming person. They lowered their heads and saluted the visitors with restraint and caution. Their hands unconsciously tightened their muskets nervously. Although the man striding towards them was a young man who looked about the same age as them, or maybe even younger than them. Regardless of whether the other party's military rank is higher than theirs, even if they just feel some indescribable and powerful pressure from the other party, they dare not make any mistakes in front of the other party. The footsteps suddenly stopped. The young commander who walked in front of them suddenly let out an extremely unpleasant hut. The hearts of the two soldiers almost stopped beating at the same time. Fortunately, the young officer's displeasure did not seem to be directed at them. The young officer raised his hand and patted away a green leaf that was suddenly blown onto his cloak by the strong evening wind, and patted away twice the dust that was brought by the leaf and stuck to his cloak. After confirming that all the dust had been dusted off, the feet wearing dark boots stepped forward again and strode forward. It was not until the sonorous and powerful footsteps gradually faded away that the two soldiers, who had lowered their heads and nervously clenched the muskets in their hands without even daring to take a breath, finally dared to raise their heads. Almost at the same time, they let out a long breath that they had been holding for a long time. When they noticed that the other party was doing the same thing as themselves, the two soldiers subconsciously raised their heads and looked at each other. Then he smiled bitterly at the same time. Although the fact that the immediate superior is a powerful person is a very good thing for them who are on the front line of the war and in the danger zone, it is really bad for the heart if the superior is too courageous. Hey, Brad, be honest. Give me a moment, Dash. Damn it. The reception room that was supposed to be neat and tidy due to the chief's hobby was now in a state of chaos. Several young people who were directly subordinate to a certain human being's strongest soldier commander in the name of elites were in a state of confusion at the moment. The culprit was the child who was trying to escape through the closed door by taking advantage of his small body to nimbly pass under Erdo's armpit. But no matter how flexible and agile he is still just a child. A pair of big hands suddenly stretched out from the side and hugged him all at once. You brat, let me run away again. Aluo, who finally caught this little guy who was as slippery as a fox, was furious and twisted the head of the child in his arms. Hey, Aluo, don't bully the kids. The girl with soft and bright blonde hair standing nearby frowned. But Petra, this guy is so annoying. He won't be honest until he's taught a lesson. Although they're about the same age, Aluo, who obviously looks older due to his appearance, complained so dissatisfiedly. What are you playing at? A very plain sentence. It was deserted, I couldn't feel the slightest emotion, and my voice wasn't too loud. But just such a sentence made the temperature of this originally noisy room drop to freezing point in an instant. It also caused several people who were arguing to freeze up in an instant. A young man with short brown and black hair stood in front of the door that was pushed open at some point. He crossed his hands on his chest and stepped on the threshold with his left foot wearing a dark boot. The cold, Dark brown pupils that showed no emotion slowly swept across the room that was supposed to be clean and tidy in his memory, but was now in a mess. That look seemed like the cold wind on the coldest winter day, which caused almost substantial pain in every inch of Ling Chi's skin. It made several subordinates in the room feel cold and shiver down their backs for a moment. Soldier, commander, this is Aluo, who was stammering and trying to explain to his superiors, suddenly took a sharp breath before he could finish his sentence. Taking advantage of the moment when the appearance of an unknown stranger attracted the full attention of the people who captured him, the boy caught by Aluo opened his mouth and bit down hard without hesitation, blood soaked in his white teeth and seeped out from the corners of his mouth. Then, the boy broke away from Aluo's arms and rushed towards the door with the smell of blood in his mouth. He quickly ran towards the escape route like a nimble little animal caught in a trap, completely ignoring the existence of the young man who only blocked half of the door. The light coming from the door fell into the boy's eyes, making his eyes brighter and brighter in an instant. You can escape soon. He thought so much that he reached out his hand eagerly to the open door. There was a loud bang. The whole room seemed to jump. The boy who tried to escape threw the young man with short brown and black hair passed by him, but the young man's right hand stretched out in an understatement and easily grabbed half of his head. A completely irresistible and powerful force caused his eyes to spin and fall in an instant. Accompanied by the deafening loud noise, there was severe pain that instantly turned his vision black. Looking at the unlucky boy whose head was smashed to the ground by the soldier commander, the corners of the eyes of several subordinates who had not reacted just now couldn't help but twitch. It hurts. The moment the boy's head was mercilessly held down and smashed to the ground, they felt their scalp numb and the right side of their forehead seemed to throb with some imaginary pain. This is no place for you to cause trouble, kid. The young soldier captain, who easily smashed the boy's head onto the cold stone tile floor with just one hand, immobilizing the boy, spoke in a calm and indifferent tone. His dark brown, slender pupils looked down from top to bottom at the embarrassed boy who was pinned to the ground by him. There was no trace of anger at all, but it made people tremble in his heart. The boy whose head was pinned to the ground by his right hand did not say a word. He was not sure if it was because he was still dazed and unable to answer from the violent impact on his head just now. The soft, light black hair fell down, covering most of the boy's face so that no one could see clearly. The boy's tightly pursed lips could only be seen moving like a twitch. Error 500, server error. 1500, that's an error. There was an error. Please try again later. That's all we know. The boy, half of his face pressed against the cold stone slab, still remained silent. He took a few breaths. Then he moved his head and turned his face up a little. Most of the small face, which was only the size of a palm, was held down by Levi. The remaining exposed half was stained by dust and could not be seen clearly. But the boy's eyes are big and bright. The green color revealed under the slender eyelashes is as tender and translucent as the firstborn tree buds in spring. At this moment, the bright eyes of the boy who seemed to be frightened by Levi were filled with tears, a little timid, just like a frightened newborn deer in the jungle. They were wet and made people feel distressed just by looking at them. He seemed to be choking and made a weak sound. I'm just a little scared. Captain, he's just a kid. Please spare him. Although she is an excellent elite soldier, Petra still maintains the unique gentleness of women. At first, she couldn't stand the wet eyes like a deer and mustered up the courage to plead to her superiors. Levi didn't answer, just let go of his hand and stood up. Petra breathed a sigh of relief and hurried over to help the boy up. The boy, who was still struggling in the encirclement of several of them just now, perhaps because he was frightened by the fierce soldier captain, now stood up from the ground obediently, as Petra wanted. He lowered his head, looking very obedient and honest. In 10 minutes, I want to see this place restored to its original state. The young commander, who gave the order to his subordinates, who were standing at attention, glanced at his right hand. When I pressed the dirty kid's face to the ground just now, the dust on the kid's face was inevitably stained. So dirty. The rather misophobic young man frowned in displeasure, then turned around and planned to leave the room and go to a place where he could wash his hands. Light filtered in from the open door, reflecting Levi's shadow diagonally inside the house. The shadow swayed as the dark boots moved. A black shadow swayed over the boy who had been silent since just now. The boy looked up. In the darkness, the dirty face was still unclear. What he could see clearly was still just a pair of big, bright eyes. The emerald green pupils glowed from the darkness, still bright and green with even a little trace of tears remaining. The timidity and fear that I had just now disappeared. At this moment, the boy's dark blue pupils, which were extremely gorgeous, were staring straight at the young man's back, just like an untamed, ferocious, and violent beast. At a moment when no one could react, the boy suddenly pulled out the dagger hidden in his boots and rushed forward. The vigorous and fierce posture is like a wolf cub in the jungle that opens its claws and fangs and pounces on its prey. The snow-white sword blade cut through the air and stabbed straight into the back of Levi's heart, who had his back turned to him. Soldier, Commander. Commander, danger. Blood-red liquid splashed in the air. Chapter 2. Near sunset, the slightly dim light slanted into the room from the open door, making the room that was not yet lit even darker. At this moment, there was deathly silence in this room that used to be clean and tidy, but was now in a mess. The heavy and rapid breathing of the child, who was holding a blood-stained dagger in both hands, seemed extremely harsh in the terrifyingly quiet atmosphere. The light coming in from outside the door just enveloped this slightly thin boy. His shoulders were tense, rising and falling violently with his rapid breathing. He clenched the dagger tightly with both hands, and his fingers were so hard that his knuckles were faintly bleeding with white marks. The light night wind swept over the child's cheek, lifting up his light black hair. The originally slightly dim light shining in from the outside fell into the big and bright emerald green pupils and seemed to suddenly burn for an instant. You could almost see the rolling and burning flames from the depths of the bright emerald pupils. He held his breath and stood there, motionless. The look from the bottom of his eyes revealed an unabashed and wild aura of arrogance and unwillingness to admit defeat. The posture was like that of a young wolf that had been trapped in a beast trap by despicable humans and was injured and unable to escape. It exposed its sharp fangs and claws that had not yet fully developed and raised its fur all over its body, intending to intimidate those who wanted to get close to it. At this moment, the injured wolf cub's emerald green eyes stared viciously at the enemy in front of him who posed the greatest threat to him. His teeth were clenched so tightly that you could almost hear a slight chattering sound. The young man with brown and black hair, who was completely opposite to the child, stood with most of his body in the shadow of the room. He stood quietly, and his steady breathing could be faintly heard. Everyone in this room, which was completely silent and had a dead atmosphere, focused their eyes on him in fear, panic, or astonishment. But in the dim room, a large shadow enveloped the young man's face, making it difficult to see the expression on his face at this moment. Under the gaze of everyone, Levi seemed completely unaware of everyone's gaze. He raised his right arm and lowered his head to look. The sleeve of the coat was cut with a long slit. Although the young soldier captain's battle-hardened body almost made a reflexive dodge action the moment he felt the murderous intent coming from behind, the sleeve of his right arm was still cut open by the dagger stabbed at him. It was a cut made by a dagger, and a little blood stain on the sleeve of the white shirt that was also cut could be clearly seen. That bit of blood caused a cold arc of light to pass through the soldier's long and narrow pupils. The child who seized the opportunity and stabbed the dagger decisively achieved a brilliant result that even the elite soldiers could not even imagine. Nice job, kid. The child's brilliant victory was praised lightly by the young soldier captain. Levi raised his head, and in the darkness, his small dark brown pupils became more and more terrifyingly bright. The pupils, which became increasingly narrow due to squinting, coldly refracted the weak light, like traces of cold glass beads without any temperature. It was a look that no one dared to look at. Even the boy who was as fierce as a wolf cub and didn't know what fear was, his body froze and trembled, and he subconsciously took a step back because of the look he looked over. The young soldier took a step forward, and the soles of his dark boots made a loud knock on the stone slab in the quiet room. He raised his right hand and tugged with his slender fingers to pull open the green cloak tied around his neck, revealing his neck with slightly darker skin. Then throw it casually into the air beside you. The following is your reward. The green cloak separated from its owner's slender and beautiful fingers and fluttered in soft arcs in the quiet room. The dark and bright wings behind it are like flying wings spread out in the air. Then he landed lightly. The most painful memory in Eren Yeager's memory began. The bright lights flickered slightly, filling the clean and tidy bedroom with soft light. A young man in a white shirt sat by the window, with one leg crossed and his cheeks slightly tilted in one hand, while the other held a stack of documents just delivered by his subordinates. On the wooden table next to him that was so clean that no stain could be seen, the white porcelain-colored rim of a cup of freshly brewed hot tea was constantly billowing with light mist. I'm talking about Levi. You are really capable of attacking a child. You knocked out 2 of that poor little guy's teeth. He looks miserable. Ha ha ha. I haven't seen you get so angry for a long time. Ha ha ha. Hanji, who had just helped his boss deal with a follow-up trouble, leaned against the wall and put his hands behind his head, laughing. He was a young man who looked about the same age as Levi. As long as he didn't make unsightly gestures like grinning, he looked pretty handsome. Although she is an excellent female officer, her appearance is somewhat unpredictable, so she is often mistaken for a man. Moreover, Hanji's peculiar personality and hobbies that can be called terrifying and her unpredictable and carefree behavior make people rarely think of her as a woman. The words she just said sounded like she was accusing her boss of being merciless to a child, but it was obvious from Hanji's relaxed and cheerful tone that she didn't care about a little kid being beaten half to death by her superiors. She just habitually wanted to provoke and tease her superiors. In fact, her subordinates, who had undergone long-term hard endurance training, were completely numb to her own parents' behavior of habitually seeking death for nothing. Can't die. Levi took a sip of tea and answered coldly. He was naturally measured in his actions. The young sergeant held the top of the steaming teacup with the 4 fingers of his right hand and seemed not to notice it as it soaked in the hot steam. The fiery white mist wrapped around the young man's slender fingers with distinct joints and calluses, giving people a wonderful and harmonious rhythmic beauty. His raised right leg rested diagonally on his left knee, and his body leaned slightly against the back of the chair. A gesture that should have made people feel lazy and impolite, but when he did it, it gave people a naturally sharp and extremely handsome feeling. It was almost like the condescending attitude that this man was born with radiated from his bones. Of course, not everyone can express the handsomeness that this posture can bring out. There was once a certain admirer of the sergeant who tried to imitate Levi's action handsomely, but Petra complained in disgust and said, "Aluo, you are so disgusting," which shocked him completely. You can't say that. This is a definite charge of child abuse. Be careful that those guys from the mainland who are just looking for trouble come to you again. This way your reputation as a devil will become more and more solid. Seeing the disdainful expression on his commander's face that he wanted to kill those pigs, Hanji shrugged in amusement and shut his mouth knowingly. What's going on with that kid? The existence of the pigs that Hanji mentioned obviously disturbed the soldier commander's mood. He frowned and put down the steaming teacup. He had just been out for a day, and why suddenly there was a troublesome kid on his territory. Captain Irwin sent someone here. Hanji clicked her tongue. It seems that he is the only survivor in a certain town that was rescued last time. It seems that Irwin intends to leave it to this place for care. Due to war, the proportion of orphans whose parents were killed and left homeless has increased significantly in recent years. In order to take care of these orphans, no, perhaps the more reason is to maintain the follow-up combat effectiveness of the Corps adopted these orphans and trained them as young reserve soldiers from an early age. The strong hatred and revenge of these orphans whose families were destroyed by the war are the best nutrients for becoming a brave soldier. There are also some children who are too young to be trained immediately. They will be assigned to different teams and let the team members take care of them. The children will be responsible for some chores such as cleaning and laundry. Until they are old enough, they will be incorporated into the juvenile reserves for combat training. Pack that brat up for me immediately and take him back. Although many officers are happy to have multiple helpers doing errands, not every officer is willing to accept it. For example, Levi's class, as an elite member of the Corps, never wanted to accept the existence of even a child because of Sergeant Levi's unknown misophobia. Owen should know this kind of thing very well. Why did he suddenly throw a kid at him? Levi frowned and thought, "Hey, I knew you would say that, so I would have done it a long time ago." Hanji, who is well aware of the sergeant commander's misophobia, smiled and showed her helplessness. Erwin led the team out early this morning to investigate. It will take about a week to come back. The center of the Corps is now empty, and there is no one who can hand over the child. She said, "I have left a message, but I still have to wait for Erwin to come back." The young soldier made a squeaky sound with obvious, unpleasant emotions. He stood up and slapped the stack of red documents in his hand on Hanji's body. "Tell Erwin that it's just a few teeth missing so far. If he doesn't pick up the kid in a week, then he will wait to collect the kid's body." Wow, he is indeed a soldier captain with the name of a devil. It would be too much to not spare even a child. The young soldier with short brown and black hair was too lazy to pay attention to his annoying subordinate who was always making noises all day long. He reached out and pushed Hanji out, who was still yelling, and slammed the door. He was sure that as long as he talked to him now, he would not be able to think about peace and quiet that night until this guy went to bed. So it's better to drive that guy away cleanly. As for beating a 7 or 8-year-old kid half to death, he didn't think there was anything wrong with what he did. Anyone holding a weapon against him is an enemy, whether it's a kid or a woman. It is natural to show no mercy to the enemy. What's more, the young sergeant glanced at the outside of his right arm holding the steaming teacup with his dark brown, slender pupils. There was a very shallow scar that had scabbed there, now showing a black and red hue. He could hardly remember the last time he was injured. TSK. That bastard brat. It should have been kicked more often.